Dear class, if you'll permit me a brief anecdote which has nothing to do with academic study, um, I just can't resist it because I'd forgotten until this moment when I played a walk-on part in a production of Othello in England, more than 50 years ago, with a delightful man who was best known as a singer called Cy Grant, having a very good stab at playing Othello. This was in a theatre in Leicester, in the Midlands of Britain, and we had some remarkable costumes, hugely heavy. This was as the senators of Venice in the council chamber scene where Othello comes to defend himself against having stolen away Brabantio's daughter Desdemona. And we, the senators, were nobly dressed in some of the heaviest costumes you could possibly imagine outside of armor. Thick wool, massive slab-fronted and slab-reared pieces of brocade. We were all wearing these things, and they were fastened with hooks and eyes, and we had rehearsed at great length, but not in these brocaded costumes. And on the opening night, the actor playing Brabantio, Desdemona's father and the accuser of Othello, strode across the stage. And this was a very large stage, the theatre of the Phoenix Theatre in Leicester, which is no longer the leading theatre but still exists, had the widest stage outside of Covent Garden Opera House in the whole of Britain. It had been a bus station, and we were all afraid it might go back to being one eventually. But luckily it is still a theatre. And so the director quite rightly used the full width of the stage in this scene. And the actor playing Brabantio swept across from one side of the stage where knots of senators were gathered listening to the other side of the stage where other knots of senators were listening, and across and back, and as part of his speech of accusation against Othello. Well, alas, on the opening night, as he passed by my little knot of senators going, he caught me. The front of his brocaded costume with its hooks and eyes hooked into my costume. So to my amazement, I found myself whisked off from my knot of senators with no chance to say goodbye, and dragged all the way across this enormous stage, which I swiftly had to disguise as being, not very plausibly, a good friend of Brabantio's, who was so interested in what he had to say, maybe a good but deaf friend, that I had to go with him, listening hard, accompanying him, supporting him. Now, the actor playing Brabantio was an actor called Donald Pelmier. Dear Donald, he changed his name officially in the course of this production. He wanted a better name, and he put an advertisement in The Stage, which was still the sort of official organ of the British theatre. And the ad said, Donald Pelmier, he hadn't told any of us he was going to do this, Donald Pelmier will henceforth be known as Maurice Oxford. A noble name, but he should have consulted somebody, because there was a little much beloved car made by the Morris company of cars, the Morris Oxford, one of the best known cars in Britain. So he had given himself the name of a car, and we wept with laughter when we saw this, unfortunately. Poor Donald. All because he'd never tried it out on anybody, or if he had, he'd not tried it out on anyone who was familiar with British cars. So the following week, a new ad was put into the stage which said, Maurice Oxford will henceforth be known once more as Donald Pelmier. There was a parallel car called the Austin Cambridge. So many were the suggestions that he should move his name from Maurice Oxford to Austin Cambridge, but happily he didn't do so. So dear Donald, or Maurice, was amazed to find himself so closely accompanied by one of the bit part extras in the production, so closely that this man wouldn't go away, and he had no idea that I couldn't go away, and that I was hooked onto him. So he would, when he had a chance, hiss at me to get the hell out of there, and I couldn't tell him, I'm attached to you. However, he kept to his moves, which was a terrible mistake. Had he simply wound up on one side of the stage and part of the choreography and stayed there, I could have stayed there next to him as somebody who was simply listening to him, but he was determined to do the moves that the director had instructed him in and choreographed him in, and so he swept back again across the stage, and so did I. I'm amazed, in retrospect, that the audience weren't falling out of their seats, but they presumably thought that I had some deeper significance that had not yet emerged, and in fact was never to emerge, because it wasn't until after the scene was over and we exited that we were able to get disentangled by one of the assistant stage managers. And having gone swept back and forth across the stage like Siamese twins. It was a terrible thing to happen to poor Donald. Certainly didn't do his big scene any favors. As for me, I was mortified. It was awful. I'd screwed up this scene through no fault of my own. But as those of you who've been on the stage will know, when it's happening, you are horribly caught up in what's going on, and it takes a very detached, possibly alienated spirit, a very superior spirit, to actually laugh at what's going on as it's going on stage, if you're involved in it. What happened to me is what happens commonly to actors when they remember what they just did. I fell over with laughter because I saw what it must have looked like, and so I've been weeping with laughter every time I think of it. It's the kind of thing that goes down in theatre annals if it happens in a famous theatre. Ours was the local, what do you call it in America, the provincial theatre, the provincial repertory theatre, summer stock, except it was all year round stock in Britain. And it was the best of the local theatres, so it didn't exactly make headlines, nor, I suspect, is it remembered by anybody except me, and possibly Donald Pelmier, a.k.a., for a week, Morris Oxford. Thank you, if you have been, for listening to this moment in my life that I can never forget, which is always brought back by that great speech, most potent, grave, and reverend seniors. We weren't very potent, grave, or reverend on that opening night. Thanks so much.